Good morning. In the last class, we have discussed about the estimation and then what are the advantages of estimation and difference between estimation and cost, and what are the errors in the estimation, and what are the constraints of the estimation. All this will be discussed in the next previous class. So today we discuss about the costing. So we have discussed the estimation in the previous class. Now we'll discuss about the costing. Estimation and costing. Okay, so we know about what is estimation and what are the elements of estimation and how we can conduct the estimation. All this we discussed. So what is costing here? So costing is also defined as it is a systematic procedure. It is a systematic procedure for recording recording accurately what we are going to record accurately, every item of expenditure. So what are now you are spending on, say for example, spending on the materials, spending on the labor, spending on the other materials and all those. So all this we are going to record accurately that every item of expenditure. It is a systematic procedure for recording accurately every item of expenditure which is incurred on the manufacture of product, which is incurred on the manufacture of a product. So here, while manufacturing a product, all different departments will be involved. Different departments will be involved in manufacturing the product. So that each department which have the item of expenditure, that has to be recorded in a proper way. So that is a systematic procedure for recording accurately every item of expenditure which is incurred on the manufacturing of a particular product by different departments of any manufacturing concern, by different departments also, because only one department will not be involved in manufacturing product. So each department, whatever the expenses they are going to incur in manufacturing that particular product, it has to be recorded. It has to be recorded. That is what we can say costing. That is what we can say costing. So costing is a systematic procedure for recording accurately every item of expenditure incurred on the manufacturing of a product by different departments. So if you take any concern manufacturing a particular type of product, it is we know that certain amount of money should be spent on what are those. One is material and say labor, maybe for advertisement and inspection of the items. So there are so many. So each one is having the different. This one, see, advertisement will be taking care of marketing department, and materials, so purchasing department will be taken care of. Inspection will be taken by the quality department. So that is why I have mentioned here by different departments. So in order to spend the we need to spend or we need to have the each department expenses. We need to have the each department expenditures. These has to be recorded. This has to be recorded and then put it in a document. So that is what you can say costing. So all these items of expenditure, it may be a small also, or it may be a major expenditure also. So systematically, we need to record all these expenditures, and then we need to sum up all this to enable the manufacturer how much. So it has to be the manufacturer should know how much of the money has expended or expenditure is happened. So in order to produce the particular product. So the procedure of arriving this amount, this is how much means, which tells about the how much money is incurred. How much money is incurred. So this amount is known as costing or cost accounting. Costing or cost accounting. So this is the meaning of costing. So what is the objectives of costing? Why we go for what are the objectives of costing? So here it is to determine the actual cost. It is determined as we told that the estimation is talks about the probable cost. Costing talks about the actual cost incurred in order to produce a particular product. So that determine the actual cost of a product, actual cost of a product, and also to determine the actual amount spent on each operation, and also we can say in and avoiding detecting and avoiding undesirable expenditure means which are we can reduce the wastage of materials. In same way we can reduce the cost of undesirable expenditure. Okay. And also it provides the information it provides information for comparison of what is the estimated cost and what is the actual cost. So for comparison between the estimated and actual cost, this costing is going to be helpful. And also to determine the percentage profit on the cost of product manufactured, the cost of the product which you are going to manufacture. So it also helps us in finding the how much percentage of profit which are going to get on the cost of the product which is manufactured. And also it determines the allowable discount. These are the objectives of costing. Costing. So now, elements of cost. We discuss the elements of cost. So here, what are the main elements which are considered in costing procedure? So elements of cost. So if any in an industry, if you take the most important consideration we need to take is products, and the most important consideration is to lower the cost of the production, and also without reducing or without sacrificing the quality of the product, we need to concern about the reducing the cost. So every manufacturing industry look at the reducing the cost of the product without compromising the quality of the product. So we need to try to reduce the cost. So in order to reduce the cost, on what elements we need to look into so that we can reduce the. So in order to achieve this reduction of cost, the estimator must have the familiar with what are the items of expenditure. So the estimator will give the list of items of expenditure. So once he know the items of expenditure, which is these items of expenditures involves in costing process. So total cost of the product, we are going to find out all this based on these items of expenditures. So any industry or organization, majorly there are three items which has major expenditure. The three items are generally we can take it into one is on material, then we have the labor, some expenses which is incurred, some expenses which are incurred during the buying, purchasing all those things. So all these three major items which you can take into consideration for reducing the cost, so these are the three elements. One is materials, labor, and expenses. So once again, each of these three elements have the direct as well as indirect, maybe direct or indirect. So we can say direct costs. These three elements will be having the direct and indirect costs. So direct cost, what is meant by direct cost? In the sense, here there is a direct material cost, cost. Second one is direct labor cost, and third one is direct expenses. And indirect costs, the total cost will be taken as direct cost and indirect cost. In this indirect cost, so indirect material cost, then indirect labor cost, and third one is indirect expenses. Right. So we'll discuss each one definition of what is the direct material cost and what is the direct labor cost and direct expenses, and as well as we can find out what is the indirect material cost, indirect labor cost, and indirect expenses. Okay. So direct material cost. So direct material. So what do you mean by direct materials? As we told that the materials which are used, the materials used in the factory up to finished product, finished product, I can say, or up to the final shape of the product, So whatever the materials which are going to use in a particular factory up to the final shape of the product, So this is very important. So the materials which are used in the factory up to the final shape of the product, directly which are using. See, the direct materials is the material which when processed are operated in a different shops, means like lathe, okay, different shops, milling shops, and say different workshops where now we use in order to get the final product, in order to get the final shape of the product, So whatever the materials which are going to use in order to produce this final shape of the product, that material cost which are involved, that is called as direct material cost. And this type of material visible in the product finally processed. So this type of material, so which may be visible or may not be visible, so in the final stage of the product, so this material can be measured and cost can be charged directly on the cost of the product. So what is the cost of this material? What is the cost of this material which is used directly in order to produce the final shape of the product? That material cost will be taken into consideration, which is called as direct material cost, and also known as a productive. This direct material cost is also known as productive material cost. Means the materials which are used to produce a particular product directly up to the final shape of the product, that cost is called as direct material cost or productive material cost. Next, coming to the indirect material cost. So what is meant by indirect materials? So as we discuss indirect materials, first we need to know what is indirect materials. So indirect materials are nothing but these are the materials which are essentially needed needed to produce the final product. To produce the final product, these are the essentially needed materials. Essentially needed materials which are helpful for producing the final product. For producing the final products. So that we can say, as we told in an example. So in the lathe machine, you are going to produce a job. Say for example, with a thread, you are producing a nut and bolt. Say for example, in order to produce a nut and bolt, we are going to use the raw material as MS mild steel, and this is the material which you are going to use straight away from the beginning to the end. And see, in order to have this produce this particular product, we need to have the use the some cotton waste. We use the coolants. And we use the in order, because there are rotatory elements are there, so we need to apply the grease in order to reduce the friction. And see, cotton waste also will be using. So these are all which are essentially needed, to produce this final product. All this which are support, I mean, indirectly involved in order to making the product. So that those materials are called as indirect materials. And the cost associated with this purchasing of, say, coolants, and as well as purchasing of grease, and as well as purchasing of cotton waste, the cost associated with that is called as indirect materials cost. So it is a material which is essentially needed, as I told, that it is essentially needed so that we can produce the final product. So this is the indirect material cost. So now we got direct material cost. What is meant by direct material cost and what is meant by indirect material cost? Now we'll second element, we have the labor. Second element is labor. So first element is material, second element is labor. So what is the direct labor? So direct labor means the workers who actually work in order to produce the final product. Actually, directly, say for example, if you are working on a lathe machine, so who is working on the lathe machine, he is called as direct labor. So who actually work or process different materials manually or with aid of machines. So the workers who actually work or process different materials manually. For example, we have taken lathe machine. Who is operating will be taken as direct labor. So here we have taken a small size of workpieces, but in industries we can take the largest diameter of the pieces. We can machine on the lathe machines. So these workers which are engaged, example we can say in this case is who have engaged on, say, machines, say for example CNC machines, milling machines, all this, who are engaged in producing a particular product, those are called as direct labor. Directly involved in manufacturing the products. So we can say generally we can call it as labor, or operators also. We can say operators also. We know that operators who actually operate the different machines by manually or with the help of the say in the case of CNC, with the help of software, we are going to operate the machine. Okay, so these are all which are responsible in order to produce the or in order to operate the machine in order to produce the final product of the So those are called as direct labor. Those are called as direct labor. So this group of labor, which we can say it is called as productive labors also. We can call this group productive labor also. We have the two meanings. One is the direct labor or productive labor. You can say direct labor or productive labor. So which are directly responsible, in producing the final product, which are directly responsible in producing the final product, are called as direct labor. Direct labor. Now, indirect labor, you can say indirect. I mean, the cost associated. I mean, it's like, say, for example, salaries giving to the laborers. That is cost is called as direct labor cost. The cost associated with paying the salaries to these laborers is called as a labor. I mean, direct labor cost. Or sometimes incentives also will be given on their production and their production. If they produce more than the standard, say extra pieces, if you are going to produce than the standard rate, standard piece rate. So they are going to give some incentives. These incentives also will be taken into consideration of calculation of direct labor cost. Indirect labor, indirect labor. So any other labor which is going to help in the performance of direct labor, in the performance of direct labor. So direct labor is performing his job. So in order to produce a particular final product, some he may take the some help. He may take the other labor's helps. Other labor's help. Say for example, in the case of loading the machine, loading the job onto the machine, loading the job onto the machine, you may require some helper. You may require some helper. So that helper who is involving indirectly in the performance of direct labor, in the performance of direct labor duties, those are called as indirect labor. Say for example, foreman in a particular organization, I mean industry, is going to help the his subordinates to in carrying out their work. So even supervisor, and as well as say inspector, quality inspector, all these are going to help this direct labor in performing his duties, in his duties. So the other labor which are helping in the performance of the direct labor duties, those are all called as indirect labor. So the wages which are going to give to this indirect labor is called as indirect labor cost. So this group of laborers which are going to help the direct labor which are discharging their duties for the proper functioning of and the industrial concern is known as the indirect labor, what we have discussed. So it's also called as non-productive labors. We can say non-productive labors. Indirect labors are non-productive because these labors are not directly involving in producing the product. So that's why we can say non-productive labors. So these labors which are directly involved, directly responsible in producing this product is called as productive labor. The nature of these duties, such that wages or salaries which are payable to them cannot be charged directly to a particular job, but can be charged to total number of total number of products manufactured, total number of products manufactured. So here, based on this, the total number of manufactured product produced in a particular month, based on this, we can give the wages to these indirect labors. We can give the wages to this indirect labor. So this is about the indirect labor cost. Then the third element is expenses. As we told that in the expenses, we have the direct expenses and indirect expenses. So what are the direct expenses? So direct expenses is nothing but the expenditure which is incurred by excluding see here, we need not to consider this what you call direct material and direct labor cost. So excluding the direct material cost, direct material cost and direct labor cost, excluding these. So the expenditure which is incurred by any industry, by excluding this direct material cost and direct labor cost, is known as expenses, is known as expenses or direct expenses. So here direct expenses, those expenses which we are going to charge directly to a particular job and also as incurred for the specific job only, means we are going to charge directly, we are going to charge directly to a particular job, to a particular job. Means what are the expenses incurred in order to carry out, this particular job or activity. How much is the expenditure is incurred, how much is the expenditure incurred in order to carry out a particular activity? That expenditure is called as direct expenses or direct expenditure. So generally these direct expenses are charged directly to a particular product or manufactured, which are going to be manufactured. This is also known as chargeable expenses, chargeable expenses. Some of the examples which you can say expenses or expenses incurred on, say, conducting experiments and conducting experiments. So we need to, as we told in the estimation, we need to conduct the experiments, to arrive at the best and lowest cost of manufacturing a particular products. So in order to arrive at the best optimum solution, we have to undergo the conduction of experiments. So these are called as chargeable expenses. And also, say, expenses incurred in making, say in the case of foundry, in making special type of patterns, or we can say molding flasks, if you want to make some molding flasks. All this, the manufacturing, in order to manufacture the product, we might need some kind of special type of patterns in the case of foundry, or it might require the molding flasks, which are not involved with the direct material cost here. So that's why we excluded this material cost, and we are taking these which are incurred in making the particular product. We may require this special type of pattern. So this is what we can call as direct expenses. In buying these patterns, or in making these patterns, or in making molding flasks, all these costs which are called as direct expenses. Next, expenses incurred on, another example is expenses incurred on drawings, preparing drawings, maybe layouts or designs, whichever you are going to consider. This preparation of drawings and preparation of layouts for manufacturing the product, those expenses also will be considered on the direct expenses. And also expenses procuring special types of, not the materials required, procuring the special types of, like, sometimes you may require jigs and fixtures for manufacturing a particular product. So this kind of special type of jigs and fixtures which are going to procure, that will be taken into a direct expenses account. Because this material which is, in order to produce particular final product, we need to have this kind of special type of fixtures. So if you procure those kind of special type of fixtures, those costs are called as, those expenses are called as direct expenses. These are the some of the examples which are we can categorize under the direct expenses head. Now, indirect expenses. Indirect expenses. So indirect expenses which cannot be charged directly. So which cannot be charged directly. The costs or expenses which cannot be charged directly are called as indirect expenses. Indirect expenses. So all these expenses other than the all other expenses other than this my direct material cost, direct material cost, direct labor cost, and direct expenses. All this will come under this indirect expenses. So, sorry. So all which are other than this direct material cost, direct labor cost, direct expenses, those expenses which are incurred, that those are called as indirect expenses. Indirect expenses. So we can say other name. So overheads. It has different meanings. Overhead expenses or overhead charges. You say overhead charges. uh, we can say overheads only. So it has a meaning. Indirect expenses also called as overhead expenses or overhead charges or overheads. Generally, overheads we can call as. Some examples we can say. Some examples on this. Some examples on this is expenses on indirect materials. Expenses on indirect materials and expenses on indirect labor are expenditures on administrative office or executive office and expenditure on say purchasing of purchasing of stationery and stores to staff. Then say watch and ward staff means security. I can say the expenses on securities, the expenses on servicing and maintenance, and also the expenses incurred on power supply, and also expenses on the say if it is renting rents on buildings or equipments, rents on equipments and plant and machinery might be you brought for rent. So building rent, plants and machinery rents, all this will be expenditure. And also depreciation amount. Depreciation is also come into the indirect expenses. Or we can say overheads. So once again, these overheads are divided into production overhead and office overhead, and another one selling overhead. So this overheads once again we can define into three types. One is production overhead, office overhead, and selling overhead. So what is meant by production overhead? See, in the production overhead, we can say it's also called as a factory overhead. It is also called as factory overhead. I mean, so these are the overheads which are concerned with the production of goods and services. Say, for example, which are involved. The production overhead means which is related to the production part. Means, say, for example, the indirect materials which are used. Indirect materials which are used, say, in order to produce a coal, or you can use the gas, or you can use the oils or grease. All this will be under a stationery in factory office, cotton waste, all this we can say it is called as production overheads. So even including cleaning purpose which we use, in the machine shop floor. So all these will be come under this production overheads under the indirect material. In the indirect labor means works which are going to be managers salaries, sweeper salaries, and also wages for the watchmen, wages for the security guards. All this we can say labor, indirect labor. In the production overhead, this is talks about the materials. It talks about the indirect materials. Whereas in the production overhead also we can say indirect labor. Those indirect labors are nothing but we told that security, housekeeping, all this will come under this indirect labor in order to maintain the production department. Say supporting staff, we can say supporting staff which are required to make clean or to make secure the all these things are, so you can say quality inspector, or you can say the supervisor or office staff of the production department. All will come under the indirect labor, and that is will be taken as into the account of production overheads, into the accounts of production overheads. Next, indirect expenses also we can call it as here the factory rent, as we told that the rent which is buildings which are taken, and depreciation and repairs. If you get any machines, repairs will come under this production overheads only, because that is a indirect expense. Repairs and maintenance, plant maintenance, or power supply, or transportation expenses, all will come under this production overhead, which are indirect expenses. Once again, this production overhead is divided into three. That is, production overhead is divided into three parts. One is indirect material. That's what we discussed. The some coal is required, some gas is required, some oils are required, some grease is required, cotton waste is required. All these indirect material costs which are involved, that will be taken into a production overhead. And also indirect labor who are involved in the security and safety purpose of the production department and office department, which are maintaining the ledgers and all those. Office staff is also required in the production department. So those staff salaries or wages given to them is called as indirect labor costs. So that is comes under the production overhead. And also indirect expenses which we discussed, that is repairing, the transportation, power supply, depreciation, all this will be coming under the indirect expenses under the production overhead. So depreciation on the machines or plant equipments. So those are called as depreciation. Will also come into the picture here in the production overhead. Next, second one is office overhead, office and administration. I can say office and administration overhead. So what and all we can call it as in this indirect material. Once again, this indirect material, I'll write first the categories: indirect material, indirect labor, and then indirect expenses. So indirect material which are required is stationery. Generally, stationery which are used in the office administration is stationery. To maintain the bookkeeping and all those, we need to have the stationery. And also some say if we are going to deliver the product, then we need to have the postage postage expenditures, all those will be come under the indirect material. And indirect labor, which is called as office staff, will be there. Office staff will be there, and the salary for this office staff is called as indirect labor. And indirect expenses, similar fashion, rent for the office floor. Rent, what is the rent you are paying for this office floor? Office floor means administrative office floor, that will be taken as indirect expenses. And any legal expenses which is there, legal expenses, that is also there, indirect expenses. And power supply, telephone, maybe for communication purpose we'll be using the telephones, so those also we can call as indirect expenses. And AC, if you are built up with the AC and all those, and then these are all will be come under the indirect expenses under the office administration overhead. Similarly, one more as we discussed is selling overheads or selling and distribution overhead. Selling and distribution overhead. So here the selling and distribution, once again we can say in the indirect materials which are involved in this. What are the materials? Then when you say selling, then packaging will be there. So packing the material, all this will be. So in order to packing the material, we need to some material, other packing materials are required. Packing materials. So cotton boxes are required. So for that packing material, what is the cost involved is called as indirect material. And also sometimes we use the stationery we need require for the sales office, because selling and distribution will be taken care by the sales office. So this sales office, whatever the stationery required for the selling and distribution of the product, so that stationery is also come into the picture. So packing material, stationery for the sales office, all this will come under the indirect material cost. And indirect labor cost, indirect labor cost, which you can say salary for the sales managers, salary for the sales office staff, salary for the warehouse staff, because these all the products will be kept in the warehouses, so that will come under the sales department. So whatever the salary incurred for the warehouse staff, and for delivery boys, and delivery for vehicle, transporting the vehicle, and as well as driver, all these delivery vans, all this will be come under the drivers. And warehouse staff, or we can say godown staff, we are going to take care of the products. And also sales office staff, because this sales and selling and distribution head will come under the sales office. So that's why sales office staff is also come under the overheads of selling and distribution. And indirect expenses in this case is, because sales department will go for advertising the product. Sales and distribution means marketing your product, advertising, and as well as traveling expenses. Say if you have a office showroom, then showroom expenses. And then rent for warehouse means godowns, wherever you keep your products, rent for warehouses. And all this, maybe insurance which are going to provide for the goods transit, insurance provide for goods transportation. So these are all will come under the sales department, which is taken as selling and distribution overhead, which is called as selling and distribution overhead. These are all called as overhead expenses or indirect expenses. Okay. So once again, these overheads are divided into two things. So that is called as fixed overheads and variable overheads, that we'll discuss in the next class. Yes. Yeah, we stop today.